Step aside. First class is not for people who wander up here hoping nobody checks. The words cracked across the Beacon Air gate loud enough to cut through the boarding music. Conversation stopped. A businessman lowered his champagne glass halfway to his mouth. A child near the window turned around. Brittany Vale folded her arms across her Navy flight attendant uniform and looked the woman up and down with open disgust. People like you do not walk onto Beacon class just because you found a coat and a ticket. The black woman standing at the scanner did not move. Her name was Tatum Lockwood. 62 years old. Dark wool coat buttoned to her throat. Gray curls tucked neatly beneath a knit hat. One leather carry-on by her feet. The coat looked old. Not fashionable old. Worn old. The cuffs were faded white from years of use. The stitching near the pocket had started to fray. Around her, the JFK first-class lounge gleamed with polished marble, gold trim, glass walls, and soft piano music floating through hidden speakers. Men in $1,000 suits checked watches. Women rolled designer luggage across imported tile. Nobody there looked like Tatum Lockwood. And Brittany knew it. "Ma'am," Tatum said quietly, holding out the paper ticket with steady fingers, "my seat is row 2. Brittany laughed. Sharp. Mean. The kind of laugh people use when they want an audience. A paper ticket? Seriously? She held the ticket between two red fingernails like it smelled bad. "You expect me to believe Beacon handed this to you?" A few passengers exchanged looks. Somebody near the coffee station lifted a phone halfway, already recording. Tatum kept her voice calm. "My name is on the ticket." "Sweetheart," Brittany said, leaning closer, "a cheap coat and a confident voice do not turn you into a first-class passenger." Silence spread across the gate. Thick. Uncomfortable. Have you ever watched a room decide who deserves respect before a person even speaks? Tatum's hand tightened slightly around the handle of her bag. That was the only sign she felt anything at all. Behind Brittany, the gate scanner blinked green and amber under fluorescent light. Boarding continued on the next lane over while people quietly slowed down just enough to watch this one. A second attendant approached from the side. Elena Ruiz. Mid-30s. Nervous eyes. She glanced down at the ticket in Brittany's hand and froze for half a second. "Brittany," she said softly, "maybe just scan it." Brittany rolled her eyes without turning around. "Elena, please. You know exactly what this is." "No," Elena whispered, "I do not think I do." Brittany ignored her. "You people always think confidence is enough. It is not." Tatum finally lifted her eyes fully to Brittany's face. Calm eyes. Controlled eyes. "I would appreciate it if you returned my ticket." Brittany smirked. "Then prove you belong here." A few people laughed under their breath. One older man looked away completely. Another passenger muttered, "Jesus," but nobody stepped forward. Nobody stopped it. Tatum slowly reached into her coat pocket. Brittany instantly straightened. "Do not even think about causing a scene." Tatum pulled out nothing more than a pair of reading glasses. Thin silver frames. She placed them gently on her face and looked at the boarding pass still pinched between Brittany's fingers. For a brief second, Elena noticed something near the bottom edge of the paper. A faded blue seal. Old-fashioned. Embossed. Not modern Beacon branding. Her expression shifted. "Brittany, enough." Brittany snapped. "Security is already watching." Two TSA officers near the lounge entrance had started paying attention. One touched his radio. Brittany lowered her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of loud. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to step away from this gate before I have you escorted out of the terminal." Tatum looked past her toward the jet bridge. Flight 908 to Dallas. Beacon class boarding. Her father used to fly that route himself decades ago. The thought flickered across her face for only a second before disappearing. "I paid for that seat," she said. Brittany smiled wider. "Then ask nicely." Tatum did not answer. "Go ahead," Brittany pressed. "Beg me to board you onto this aircraft." The words hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere behind them, an espresso machine hissed loudly. Nobody moved. Tatum looked down at the ticket one last time. Her thumb brushed the corner gently. The paper had softened with age. There was handwriting on the back. Almost faded away now. Elena saw it again. Her stomach tightened. "Brittany, stop." Too late. Brittany snatched the ticket fully from Tatum's hand and tore it straight down the middle. Gasps rippled through the lounge. Tatum did not blink. Brittany tore the halves again. Then once more. 4 pieces drifted onto the polished floor between them like snow. "There," Brittany said coldly. "Now you definitely are not boarding." A phone camera zoomed closer. One of the TSA officers started walking toward the gate. Elena's face had gone completely pale. Tatum lowered her eyes to the torn paper at her feet. One fragment had landed face up beside her shoe. On it, barely visible beneath the tear, was a faded signature in blue ink. Lockwood. Tatum bent slowly, picked up only that piece, and slipped it carefully into her coat pocket. Then she reached for her phone. No anger. No shaking. That frightened Elena more than if she had screamed. Tatum pressed one number. Waited. The line connected immediately. Her voice remained calm enough to disappear inside the silence swallowing the lounge. "Ground every beacon plane." Brittany burst out laughing. Loud. Triumphant. "Oh my God. Listen to yourself." But across the gate, one of the TSA officers suddenly stopped walking. His radio crackled sharply. Elena's eyes darted toward the nearest departure monitor just as the screen flickered once. Then twice. And somewhere beyond the glass walls overlooking the runway, a departing Beacon aircraft began turning slowly back toward the terminal. The departure board flickered again. Delayed. Then another line turned red. Then another. Passengers around gate 14 stopped talking all at once. A businessman lowered his phone slowly. Somewhere farther down the terminal, a pilot hurried past the glass wall toward another Beacon aircraft with confusion written across his face. Brittany's smile weakened for the first time. "What is this?" she muttered. Tatum Lockwood stood perfectly still beneath the white airport lights. The torn piece of ticket remained tucked safely inside her coat pocket. Her fingers rested against it for only a second before she let her hand fall again. Around her, whispers moved through the lounge like cold air. Did she really stop the flights? Who even is she? Probably some crazy woman. One teenager kept recording openly now. The phone camera reflected in the polished marble floor beside the scraps of the destroyed ticket. Elena Ruiz bent down quietly and picked up one torn fragment before security could step on it. Her eyes landed on the faded blue seal again. Lockwood Foundation Archive. She swallowed hard. Brittany noticed immediately. "Elena." Her voice snapped like a whip. "Drop that." Elena hesitated. Just long enough for Tatum to notice. Then she slowly handed the paper over. Brittany crushed it in her fist. "This woman is not boarding anything." Tatum said nothing. But behind the calm in her face lived something heavier than humiliation. Grief. Old grief. The kind that learns how to stand upright in public. 6 hours earlier, before the airport lights, before the phones recording her silence, Tatum had stood alone inside a quiet apartment overlooking the Hudson River. No servants. No assistants. Just soft jazz from an old speaker and the sound of rain against the windows. The apartment did not look like the home of someone powerful. Bookshelves crowded the walls. Aviation manuals stacked beside framed black and white photographs. A leather chair worn smooth by decades of use sat beside the window. On the table rested a folded wool coat. Her mother's coat. Tatum touched the sleeve carefully before putting it on. The fabric still carried the faint scent of cedar from the old closet it had lived in for years. Beside the coat sat a small photograph of a smiling black pilot standing beside a propeller aircraft in 1948. Isaiah Lockwood. Tuskegee Airman. Founder of Beacon Air. Tatum lifted the frame gently. Her thumb brushed the corner where the glass had cracked years ago during her father's funeral. "I hope it still matters," she whispered softly. "Not the airline. Not the money. The dignity." That was what she was trying to protect. Beacon Air had once been built for people who were told they did not belong anywhere near first class. Her grandfather used to say every passenger carries a story heavier than their suitcase. Somewhere along the years, the company had forgotten that. Tatum walked into the kitchen and poured herself coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. The handle had been repaired twice. Her assistant Trina hated that mug. "You own half the East Coast fleet," she always complained. "Please buy a new cup." Tatum never did. Because her mother used that same cup during night bookkeeping shifts while helping Isaiah build the airline from one route into 50. Some things deserve to survive wear and tear. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Trina calling. Tatum let it ring twice before answering. "Please tell me you changed your mind about the inspection," Trina said immediately. "You know what happens online now. One video. One accusation. One misunderstanding." Tatum stared out the rain-covered window toward the city lights. "That is exactly why I have to go." "Then at least bring security." No, silence. Then Trina sighed. "You still think employees recognize the coat?" Tatum looked down at the worn sleeve around her wrist. "Someone should." Back at JFK, Brittany folded her arms tighter as airport chatter grew louder around them. Another Beacon flight disappeared from the departure board entirely. A gate agent rushed past carrying a headset and whispered urgently into a radio. Security stopped several feet away now, uncertain instead of aggressive. That change did not escape Brittany. Neither did the way Elena kept staring at Tatum. "Have you ever been judged by people who never once asked your name before deciding your worth?" A little boy standing beside his mother suddenly looked up at Tatum and asked quietly, "Did you really stop the airplanes?" His mother yanked him back immediately. "Ethan, do not bother people." But Tatum offered the boy a small tired smile anyway. "Sometimes people stop listening," she said softly. "Until everything stops moving." The boy nodded like he understood more than the adults did. Then Brittany stepped between them. "Enough." She pointed toward the terminal exit. "You need to leave before this becomes a federal issue." Her confidence sounded forced now. Thin. Tatum reached into her coat pocket again. Brittany stiffened immediately, eyes narrowing. Slowly, Tatum removed a small silver luggage tag attached to old leather. The edges were scratched from years of travel. One side carried a faded Beacon Air emblem no longer used publicly. The other side carried initials pressed into the metal. M.L. Brittany frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" Before Tatum could answer, every screen above the gate suddenly went black. The piano music cut out mid-note. Then a calm automated voice echoed across the entire terminal. "Attention Beacon Air executive personnel. Chairman-level emergency authorization confirmed. Await further instruction." And near the end of the jet bridge, a gray-haired captain in full uniform broke into a sprint toward Gate 14. The captain's polished shoes slammed against the marble floor as he rushed toward Gate 14. Conversations died instantly around him. Brittany straightened so fast her scarf shifted crooked against her neck. "Captain Hale," she said quickly, forcing a smile, "this woman caused a disruption and, where is the operations line?" Captain Marcus Hale cut her off sharply. His eyes were fixed on the frozen departure screens overhead. Every beacon gate in Terminal 4 now showed the same red warning. Operational hold. Around them, passengers began pulling out phones faster now. Videos spread in real time. Ground stop at beacon. Somebody said a woman threatened the airline. Probably another crazy protest. Tatum Lockwood stood alone near the scanner while the storm grew around her. Nobody offered her a chair. Nobody asked if she was all right. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart slowed down just enough to look at the wool coat she wore. His face changed for half a second. Recognition maybe. Or memory. Then he lowered his eyes and kept walking. That was how the world usually worked. People noticed. But they rarely stepped forward. Across the lounge, a giant advertisement played silently on a curved digital wall. Smiling flight attendants. Crystal champagne glasses. The words "every passenger is family" glowing above clouds. Brittany glanced at the screen and then back at Tatum with irritation. "You think one phone call gives you power?" she snapped quietly. "Do you know how many actual executives walk through this airport?" Tatum looked at her calmly. "Enough to know this should never have happened." Brittany scoffed. "You people always say that after causing trouble." Elena flinched at the words. Nearby passengers heard it too. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked away. One businessman muttered under his breath, "This is becoming a PR nightmare. Not humiliation. Not cruelty. Public relations." That mattered more to him. Captain Hale finally stopped in front of the gate desk, breathing hard. Sweat glistened near his collar despite the cold terminal air. "Who authorized the emergency stop?" he demanded. Nobody answered immediately. Brittany pointed toward Tatum. "Her." The captain's eyes moved toward the woman in the worn coat. For one strange second, his expression shifted. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper. Careful attention. His gaze dropped briefly toward the silver luggage tag still resting in Tatum's hand. M.L. The old beacon emblem scratched across faded metal. He went completely still. "Where did you get that tag?" Brittany laughed nervously. "Probably online." Tatum answered softly. "It belonged to my mother." Silence again. Small. Tight. Dangerous. Captain Hale opened his mouth slightly, then stopped himself. Around them, airport radios crackled non-stop now. Dallas grounded. Atlanta returning to gate. Maintenance wants answers. The entire terminal felt different suddenly. Not luxurious anymore. Fragile. Like one wrong word could crack everything open. 3 floors above the gate, inside Beacon Air's Executive Operations Center, men in tailored suits crowded around glowing monitors. Delayed route stacked across the East Coast map in red. "Who triggered chairman-level authority?" one executive barked. "The code came from a legacy line," another answered quietly. "That line should not even be active anymore." Down at Gate 14, Brittany's confidence slowly began slipping into anger. Angry people often get louder when fear starts crawling underneath them. "I followed protocol," she said sharply. "Look at her. No verified digital pass. No executive profile. No assistant. No credentials." Tatum's fingers brushed the torn ticket piece hidden inside her pocket. "Not every credential glows on a phone screen." Brittany stepped closer. "Then maybe you should have dressed like someone important." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Even Elena looked ashamed now. "Have you ever noticed how quickly people trust uniforms over humanity?" Captain Hale turned toward Brittany slowly. "Did you destroy the boarding pass?" "It was fake." "Did you destroy it?" Brittany hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Across the gate, the little boy from earlier tugged on his mother's sleeve again. "Mom," he whispered too loudly, "why is everybody afraid of her now?" Nobody answered him. Elena quietly reached beneath the counter and pulled up the archived boarding scan log on her monitor. Her eyes widened immediately. One line on the screen flashed gold instead of blue. Special handling authorization. Lockwood route clearance. Before she could say anything, the system abruptly locked her out. Access restricted. Brittany saw her expression change. "What did you find?" Elena swallowed hard. "Nothing." But fear had already entered her voice. A loud chime suddenly echoed through the terminal overhead. Then another. All nearby Beacon employees instinctively straightened. Captain Hale looked toward the private elevator at the far end of the lounge. The brushed steel doors were opening. 2 airport security supervisors stepped out first. Then a gray-haired woman in a dark executive suit appeared behind them holding a tablet tightly against her chest. She scanned the crowd once. Her eyes landed directly on Tatum. And for the first time since the humiliation began, somebody in authority looked genuinely nervous. The gray-haired executive woman stopped 3 feet from Tatum Lockwood and lowered her voice immediately. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "operations needs clarification before this spreads further." Brittany blinked. The tone alone confused her. This was not how executives spoke to disruptive passengers. The woman held a black tablet tightly against her chest. Her Beacon Air badge read, "Diane Mercer, Senior Operations Director." Tatum looked at her calmly. "Then operations should stop deleting archive authorizations from active systems." Diane's expression changed instantly. Small. Sharp. Like someone hearing a locked door click open somewhere deep underground. Brittany stepped forward before Diane could answer. "You cannot seriously be entertaining this." Her heel struck the marble floor hard enough to echo. This woman threatened the airline. Tatum's eyes stayed on Diane. "No. I protected it." Silence. Again. Tiny reactions spread through the lounge. A passenger lowered his phone slightly. Elena looked between them with growing confusion. "What archive authorization?" she asked quietly. Diane did not answer. Instead, she glanced toward the frozen departure board overhead. 27 delayed flights now. Millions of dollars bleeding every minute. But what unsettled her more was something else entirely. The old emblem on Tatum's luggage tag. Beacon's original wing insignia retired 30 years ago after a corporate merger. Almost nobody under 60 recognized it anymore. Brittany noticed the look passing between them and immediately tried to crush it. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Anybody can buy vintage airline junk online." Tatum finally turned toward her fully. Calm. Controlled. "The left wing on that emblem is angled incorrectly on every replica ever sold." Brittany frowned. "What?" "Most copies reverse the alignment." Tatum's voice stayed soft. "The original symbol pointed upward 11 degrees. My grandfather designed it that way himself after his first combat flight." The words landed strangely. Too precise. Too effortless. Captain Hale looked at the luggage tag again. Longer this time. Around them, airport staff started whispering now instead of passengers. How would she know that? Who even talks like that? "Wait, grandfather." Brittany laughed too loudly. Fear sat underneath it now. So what? She memorized some company trivia. Tatum did not respond. She simply reached down and adjusted the strap on her carry-on. Diane noticed something then. Sewn carefully into the inner lining of the bag was a faded stitched phrase in gold thread. "Every passenger has a name." Her breath caught slightly. Beacon stopped using that slogan decades ago. Back when the airline still belonged entirely to the Lockwood family. Where did you get the bag? Diane asked quietly. Brittany groaned. Oh my God. Enough with the antiques. But Diane ignored her. Tatum answered without hesitation. My mother carried it on Beacon Route 7 in 1963. Captain Hale's jaw tightened. Route 7. The original Southern integration route. The flight where Marion Lockwood faced death threats after insisting black passengers sit in first class under the company's new equal seating policy. That story was not public knowledge anymore. It lived buried in old training archives almost nobody read. Brittany crossed her arms harder. You are all acting insane. She pointed directly at Tatum now. She has no executive credentials. No verified access. No identification visible. This is exactly how security failures happen. Actually, Tatum said quietly, Beacon Policy 14C states executive verification can be completed verbally through Operations Command during founder-level incidents. Diane's eyes widened before she could stop herself. Brittany stared blankly. That policy does not exist. It does, Captain Hale said slowly. But only 3 people in the company still use it. A cold silence rolled through the gate. Even the nearby TSA officers looked uncertain now. Tatum had not raised her voice once. Had not threatened anyone. Had not announced power or status. But every sentence she spoke sounded like someone walking through a house they knew by memory in the dark. Have you ever met someone who looked ordinary until they spoke one sentence too precise to ignore? Brittany refused to let the room slip away from her. Enough. She pointed toward security. I want her removed from the gate until legal arrives. One of the TSA officers stepped forward reluctantly. Ma'am, he said to Tatum, we may need you to come with us. Elena suddenly spoke up from behind the desk. Wait. Everyone turned. Her hand trembled slightly over the keyboard. The system just reopened one file. Brittany snapped around immediately. Close it. But Elena kept staring at the screen. Her face drained of color. On the monitor, beneath layers of restricted access warnings, one line had appeared in gold letters. Founder Family Emergency Protocol active. Below it sat a partially revealed authorization name. T. Lock. Before anyone could read further, the screen went black again. And from somewhere deeper inside the terminal, the sound of approaching footsteps began echoing fast across the marble corridor. The footsteps grew louder. Fast. Deliberate. 4 more airport security officers rounded the marble corridor beside the private elevator. Their radios crackled non-stop. Passengers moved backward instinctively, creating a wider circle around Gate 14 like people stepping away from a fire they could not yet see. Brittany Vale saw the extra security and immediately straightened with relief. Control was slipping from her hands. She intended to grab it back. Finally, she snapped. Remove her. Tatum Lockwood did not move. Diane Mercer stepped slightly forward first. Maybe we should slow this down. Brittany turned sharply toward her. Slow it down. She shut down half the airline. We do not know that yet. Everybody here knows it. Brittany pointed toward the crowd. Look around. She caused panic. She disrupted operations. She threatened federal transportation routes. Every sentence came louder now. Sharper. Designed for the phones recording nearby. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some people nodded along simply because Brittany wore the uniform. Authority always sounds believable when delivered confidently enough. One security officer approached Tatum carefully. Ma'am, he said, we need you to come with us for questioning. Questioning? Elena repeated quietly. For what? Brittany answered before anyone else could. Fraudulent access. Threatening airline operations. Impersonation. Tatum lifted her eyes slowly. Impersonation, Brittany crossed her arms. You heard me. Tatum's voice stayed calm. Interesting choice of word. Something about the way she said it made Captain Hale glance toward her again. Tiny clue. Tiny crack. But Brittany bulldozed forward before silence could settle too long. This is exactly what people like her do, she said bitterly. Cause chaos and hide behind technicalities. Elena's face tightened. Even some passengers looked uncomfortable now. But nobody stopped her. Nobody ever wants to become the next target in a public humiliation. Brittany walked behind the gate counter and slammed her hand against the keyboard. Lock down the gate records, she ordered. Nobody accesses executive logs until legal clears this. Diane frowned immediately. You do not have authority to issue that command. I do right now. Brittany clicked faster. The system monitor flashed red. Access restricted. Archive lock enabled. Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. You locked founder records? Brittany did not even look at her. I locked a security breach. Tatum watched quietly. Too quietly. That unsettled Brittany more than shouting would have. You know, Brittany continued, turning back toward the crowd, real executives do not travel alone with old luggage and paper tickets. She smirked toward Tatum's coat. Real power does not dress like a lost grandmother. A few nervous laughs escaped nearby. Tatum lowered one hand slowly to the old wool sleeve near her wrist. My mother wore this coat the first time she was allowed to sit in Beacon first class, she said softly. A lot of people laughed that day too. The sentence hit strangely hard. One of the older pilots standing near the corridor looked up sharply at that. His face changed for only a second before he looked away again. Micro hope. Tiny recognition. Then fear swallowed it. Brittany immediately cut across it. Enough with the stories. She pointed toward security again. Take her badge. She does not have a badge, one officer answered. Brittany blinked. Exactly. Tatum reached calmly into her pocket then. Every security hand shifted slightly toward their belts. Slowly, she removed not a weapon, not credentials, but the torn fragment of her boarding pass. She unfolded it carefully between her fingers. On the small piece of paper, the faded blue signature remained visible beneath the tear. Lockwood. Captain Hale stared at it. Diane Mercer stared harder. Brittany laughed again, but weaker this time. A ripped piece of paper proves nothing. Tatum tilted the fragment slightly toward the overhead light. No, she said quietly. But signatures usually do. The crowd fell silent again. One of the security supervisors stepped closer to Diane and whispered urgently into her ear. Her face drained of color. The original gate camera feed is missing, he muttered. Brittany's head snapped toward him instantly. Too fast. Too defensive. Tatum noticed. So did Captain Hale. Missing? Diane repeated. How does gate footage disappear? Brittany interrupted immediately. Technical issue. Happens all the time. Not on secured executive terminals, Captain Hale said coldly. Emotional tension tightened across the lounge like wire pulled too hard. Elena suddenly looked back toward her monitor again. One tiny notification had appeared at the corner of the locked screen before vanishing. Backup archive active. Remote storage connected. Her breathing caught. Somebody else still had access. Brittany saw her expression shift again and slammed her hand against the desk. Step away from the system, Elena. But there is still a backup, step away. The outburst echoed across the terminal. Even nearby passengers flinched. Brittany realized too late how bad it sounded. But fear had fully entered her now. She pointed directly at Tatum. This woman is not a passenger anymore. She is a threat to this airline. The security officers moved closer around Tatum in a half-circle. The little boy near the window whispered to his mother again, "Why are they treating her like a criminal?" His mother pulled him away silently. Tatum stood alone beneath the frozen departure board while phones kept recording from every angle. Then, from somewhere inside Diane Mercer's tablet, a sharp notification sound cut through the silence. Diane looked down instinctively. One incoming message. Priority, Board of Directors requesting live visual confirmation. And beneath it, a single line appeared on the screen. Is the woman wearing Marion Lockwood's coat? The message on Diane Mercer's tablet stayed frozen on the screen for only 2 seconds. But 2 seconds was enough. Enough for Captain Hale to see it. Enough for Elena's breath to catch. Enough for Brittany Vale to realize something dangerous had survived the chaos she created. What does that mean? Brittany demanded immediately, stepping closer. Diane locked the tablet screen too fast. Nothing. That did not look like nothing. Tatum Lockwood remained silent beneath the departure board while dozens of eyes moved between her old coat and the executive surrounding her. Phones still recorded. Whispers kept spreading. Somewhere deeper in the terminal, another beacon departure announcement abruptly cut off mid-sentence. The airline still was not moving. Diane lowered her voice carefully toward Tatum. "May I see the coat?" Brittany spun toward her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Diane ignored her completely. Tatum studied Diane for a long moment. Then, without drama, she slowly unbuttoned the top of the wool coat. The fabric shifted open just enough to reveal the inside lining near the collar. There, stitched carefully by hand in fading gold thread, sat a name. Marion Lockwood. Captain Hale inhaled sharply. Elena covered her mouth instinctively. Brittany stared at the stitching without understanding why everyone else suddenly looked nervous. "It is a name sewn into a coat," she snapped. "People sew names into coats every day." "Not that name," Captain Hale said quietly. Silence spread again. Heavy this time. The older pilot near the corridor took one slow step forward. "My father trained under Isaiah Lockwood," he said softly without taking his eyes off the coat. "He used to talk about Marion." Brittany immediately cut across him. "This proves nothing." Her voice rose louder again, desperate to regain the room. "Anybody could fake stitching." Tatum calmly reached into the inner pocket and removed something small wrapped in tissue paper. Her hands moved carefully. Respectfully. She unfolded the paper and revealed a silver Beacon Air wing pin. Old. Tarnished with age. The original founder insignia. Unlike modern pins, this one carried tiny engraved initials on the back. M.L. Diane's face went pale. "That pin was retired after the merger," she whispered. "Only founder family members kept originals." Brittany laughed again, but the sound cracked halfway through. "Vintage memorabilia. That is all this is." Tatum turned the pin gently beneath the overhead light. The right wing was repaired by hand in 1971 after turbulence cracked the frame over Tennessee. Captain Hale looked stunned. "How would you know that?" Tatum's eyes rested briefly on the pin. "Because I watched my mother repair it at our kitchen table." The words landed quietly. But they hit the room harder than shouting could have. Have you ever seen an object become dangerous simply because too many people recognize it at once? Elena suddenly remembered something. Fast. Sharp. "Wait," she whispered. Her fingers flew across the keyboard before Brittany could stop her. "The archive photograph." "Elena," Brittany warned. "Do not." But the younger attendant already pulled up a partially restored training image from Beacon's old employee database. The black and white photo loaded slowly through system lag. Grainy. Damaged. A young black woman standing beside an airplane staircase in the same wool coat. The same wing pin. Marion Lockwood. The crowd leaned closer instinctively. One passenger whispered, "That is her coat." Another muttered, "Oh my God." Tiny hope flickered across the terminal for the first time. Then Brittany lunged across the counter and slammed the monitor shut. Enough. The sound cracked through the lounge. This woman manipulated old files. That is what is happening here. You cannot manipulate archived print scans from 1963, Elena fired back before fear could stop her. Brittany's eyes hardened instantly. Careful. One word. Cold enough to silence her again. The security officers shifted uneasily now. Nobody knew who to believe anymore. That was the problem with truth. Once it enters a room, control becomes slippery. Diane slowly extended her hand toward the silver wing pin. "May I?" Tatum hesitated only briefly before placing it into Diane's palm. The executive held it like something sacred. Her thumb brushed across the engraved initials on the back. Then her expression changed completely. "There is another marking," she whispered. Captain Hale stepped closer. Tiny engraved numbers hidden beneath the clasp. BF-01. Beacon Founder. Unit 1. The very first ceremonial pin ever issued by the airline. Brittany saw the reaction and panic flashed openly across her face for the first time. "No," she said too quickly. "No, that cannot be real." Then she made a mistake. A fatal little mistake. Those originals were supposed to stay locked in the founder vault. Silence crashed across the gate. Brittany froze immediately after saying it. Too late. Diane looked up slowly. "How," she asked carefully, "would you know what is stored in the founder vault?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the terminal noise seemed to disappear for one suspended second. Then Elena's locked monitor suddenly flickered back to life by itself. One restored archive file appeared on screen. Access granted, legacy camera feed recovered. And beneath it sat one paused video frame. A younger Brittany Vale standing inside a restricted executive archive room 3 months earlier. The restored frame glowed on Elena's monitor like something dragged out of a grave. Young Brittany Vale. Restricted archive room. 3 months earlier. The timestamp sat frozen in the corner beside the Beacon Founder Vault seal. Nobody spoke for a full second. Brittany's face lost color first. Then anger rushed in to cover it. "That footage is out of context." Her voice cracked slightly. "Archive staff enter that room all the time. Flight attendants do not," Diane Mercer said quietly. Brittany turned toward her instantly. "You think I stole something?" Tatum Lockwood still had not moved from beneath the departure board. But her eyes rested on the paused image longer than anyone else's. "Come outside. Something older underneath." Captain Hale stepped closer to the monitor. "Zoom in." Elena hesitated only briefly before enlarging the frame. The image sharpened slowly through digital grain. Brittany stood inside the archive room holding a small storage box against her chest. White label. Founder Collection B. The room around Gate 14 went silent again. One passenger whispered, "Oh God." Brittany pointed at the screen immediately. "That proves nothing." "Then what was in the box?" Captain Hale asked. Brittany folded her arms tightly. "Training materials." "Founder archives are not training materials. You all are acting insane over old junk." "Old junk." The words landed differently on Tatum. Her fingers tightened slightly around the torn ticket fragment still hidden inside her pocket. Tiny motion. Tiny wound. Because none of this was junk to her. Not the coat. Not the pin. Not the old slogan stitched into worn leather bags. These were the last surviving pieces of people she loved. 20 years earlier, after Marion Lockwood died quietly from heart failure, reporters crowded outside Beacon headquarters asking about stock prices while Tatum sat alone inside her mother's apartment folding clothes that still smelled faintly like cedar soap and airplane cabin coffee. Executives argued over merger percentages in one room while Tatum packed away handwritten route maps in another. She found the old wool coat hanging beside the kitchen door. The silver wing pin tucked carefully into the pocket. And inside the lining, sewn almost invisibly beneath the gold thread name, a handwritten note in blue ink. If they forget kindness, they do not deserve the sky. Marion Lockwood. Tatum never forgot those words. Even after the board replaced family portraits with luxury branding. Even after employees stopped learning founder history entirely. Even after Beacon became too expensive for the people it was originally built to protect. Why are you protecting this stuff? Brittany snapped suddenly, dragging the room back into the present. It is just an airline. Tatum looked at her quietly. No, one word. Heavy enough to stop the noise around them again. It was my family. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some passengers lowered their phones for the first time. A younger gate agent near the back whispered softly to another employee, "She talks like she knew them." Brittany heard it too. Panic flickered behind her eyes. Everybody stop feeding into this fantasy. She pointed toward the monitor again. Delete the footage. Elena froze. What? Delete it. The order echoed hard across the gate. Elena looked toward Diane instead. The executive did not answer immediately. That hesitation mattered. Tiny hope. Tiny crack in the wall Brittany built around herself. Then Brittany lunged across the counter and yanked the Ethernet cable directly from the terminal. The monitor went black instantly. Gasps broke out around the lounge. There, Brittany snapped. Now this circus ends. Captain Hale stared at her in disbelief. You just destroyed active evidence. I protected company property. No, Diane said quietly. You protected yourself. Brittany's head turned sharply toward her. Careful. The threat hung openly now. Not hidden anymore. Across the terminal, TSA officers exchanged uneasy looks. One of them quietly stepped farther away from Brittany instead of closer. Tatum noticed that too. She noticed everything. That was what years inside boardrooms taught you. Not power. Observation. The little boy near the window tugged on his mother's sleeve again. Mom, he whispered, why does that lady look scared if she is right? His mother could not answer him. Nobody could. Because fear changes shape when truth gets too close. Diane slowly turned back toward Tatum. Her voice softened unexpectedly. Your mother really wore that coat on Route 7. Tatum nodded once. They threatened to drag her off the plane. Captain Hale closed his eyes briefly. My father told me that story when I was a cadet. Brittany immediately interrupted again. Stories do not prove identity. But even she sounded weaker now. Desperate. Then a new notification vibrated inside Diane's tablet. She glanced down instinctively. Her face changed instantly. No, she whispered. Captain Hale looked over her shoulder. One internal security message. Founder Vault breach investigation reopened. Attached below it sat a newly recovered inventory record. Missing item, Founder Authorization Ledger. Last registered access. Marion Lockwood Personal Archive Collection. Tatum went completely still. For the first time since the humiliation began, real pain crossed her face. Sharp. Human. Because she knew exactly what that ledger contained. And somewhere behind the frozen departure boards, someone else inside Beacon Air had just realized she knew too. The moment the words, Founder Authorization Ledger, appeared on Diane Mercer's tablet, Brittany Vale understood one thing immediately. If that ledger surfaced, her version of the story would collapse in front of everyone watching. So she did what frightened people with power often do. She got louder. Enough. Her voice cut across the lounge sharp as broken glass. This woman manipulated archived company records and disrupted federal air traffic. I want her detained now. The surrounding passengers shifted instantly. Fear spreads fast in public places. Especially when spoken through a uniform. 2 additional security officers moved toward Tatum Lockwood. Their polished shoes echoed against the marble floor while nearby travelers quietly stepped backward, creating distance between themselves and the woman in the old coat. Nobody wanted to stand too close to trouble. Brittany pointed directly at Tatum. She is not some sweet old lady. She shut down flights across the East Coast. Temporarily paused, Tatum corrected softly. There is a difference. Brittany laughed coldly. You really think technical language saves you? Captain Hale frowned slightly at that sentence. Tiny clue. Tatum spoke like someone who understood operational terminology too precisely. But Brittany kept steamrolling forward before anyone could sit with the thought. This entire stunt was planned, she announced loudly enough for the phones recording nearby. Fake founder stories. Fake artifacts. Fake emotional manipulation. A man in a business suit nodded immediately. Honestly, it sounds believable, he muttered. Another passenger whispered, people fake stuff online all the time now. Public opinion was shifting again. Not toward truth. Toward convenience. It was easier to believe the woman in uniform than the black woman standing alone. Diane Mercer looked uneasy. Brittany, we still have unresolved archive access issues. Internal matters, Brittany snapped. Not passenger matters. Then she turned back toward security. Escort her out before legal liability gets worse. Tatum did not resist when one officer stepped closer beside her carry-on. She only placed one calm hand on the worn leather bag. Please be careful with that. Why? Brittany sneered instantly. More fake family treasures inside. Tatum met her eyes quietly. My mother's handwriting. Silence touched the crowd again for half a second. Then Brittany bulldozed over it. Open the bag. Captain Hale immediately looked up. You do not have authorization to search personal property without cause. Brittany spun toward him. Cause? She pointed dramatically toward the frozen departure boards overhead. The entire airline is bleeding money because of her. Around them, more phones lifted higher. Videos were already spreading online. Some titled her a fraud. Others called her dangerous. One clip replayed Brittany tearing the ticket apart beside captions reading, Woman shuts down airline after first-class meltdown. Nobody online knew the truth yet. But they were choosing sides anyway. Elena suddenly stepped forward again, nervous but trying. The backup archive server is still active, she said carefully. If we recover the founder ledger, it could explain. No, Brittany cut her off instantly. You are done touching company systems. But the access trail, one more word and I report you for data tampering too. Elena fell silent immediately. Tiny hope crushed again in public. Have you ever noticed how quickly fear makes good people quiet? Tatum watched Elena gently. You should protect your job, she said softly. Brittany smirked. Finally. Something smart. Then Diane's tablet vibrated again. Another security alert. Live board inquiry requested. Brittany saw it and moved fast. Give me that. Diane pulled the tablet back immediately. Absolutely not. This concerns my gate. No, Diane answered quietly. It concerns the founder division now. The words changed the air again. Founder division. Most younger employees had never even heard that term before. Brittany noticed several passengers reacting and immediately pushed harder to regain control. Listen carefully, she announced loudly toward the crowd. Beacon Air does not hand operational authority to random people with old coats and emotional stories. Several passengers nodded. One woman even clapped softly once in support. False victory settled visibly across Brittany's face. She thought she had won the room back. Security officers now stood directly beside Tatum. One reached carefully toward her carry-on. "Ma'am, we need to inspect the bag." Tatum slowly removed her hand from the leather handle. Calm. Dignified. Alone. The zipper opened halfway. Inside sat only simple things at first glance. Folded clothes. Reading glasses. A worn notebook. Then one officer paused suddenly. "Wait." He carefully lifted something wrapped inside soft cloth. A black leather binder. Old. Heavy. Embossed faintly in gold. Beacon Founder Records. Brittany's face drained instantly. "No," she whispered before catching herself. Too late. Captain Hale looked directly at her. "You recognize it?" Brittany forced a laugh too quickly. Everybody recognizes company branding. But her voice was shaking now. The officer slowly opened the binder. Inside the front cover sat one faded handwritten line in blue ink. "Property of Marion Lockwood. Return directly to chairwoman's office if found." The crowd went completely silent. And before anyone could speak, the terminal speakers crackled overhead. "Attention Gate 14. Executive Board requests immediate visual confirmation of passenger identified as T. Lockwood." The terminal speakers crackled again. "Executive Board requests immediate visual confirmation of passenger identified as T. Lockwood." Every sound inside Gate 14 seemed to collapse inward after that. Phones stayed raised. Passengers whispered faster now. Security officers looked at one another instead of at Tatum Lockwood. And Brittany Vale realized something terrifying. The room was beginning to drift away from her. So she struck harder. "Nobody moves." Her voice cut sharply across the lounge. "This woman is under active investigation." She stepped directly between Tatum and the security officers like she still owned the story. "Do not let her touch anything else." One officer hesitated. "Ma'am, the board specifically requested visual confirmation." "And they will get it," Brittany snapped. "After legal clears identity fraud concerns." Identity fraud. The words landed loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear clearly. Several immediately backed farther away from Tatum. One woman grabbed her designer handbag tighter against her chest. A man muttered, "I knew something was off." Public judgment shifted again. Fast. Ugly. Convenient. Tatum stood alone beneath the frozen departure board while her mother's old coat hung heavy around her shoulders. Her fingers rested lightly against the black founder ledger still sitting half open in the security officer's hands. "Please do not damage that book," she said quietly. Brittany laughed coldly. "You mean the stolen property?" Tatum looked at her calmly. "You already destroyed one family record today." Silence hit the gate again. Even Brittany flinched slightly at that. Then anger rushed back stronger. Enough with the emotional performance. She pointed toward security. "Escort her downstairs. Now." Captain Hale stepped forward immediately. "Brittany, this is becoming excessive." "No," Brittany fired back. "This is protocol. Founder Division involvement changes protocol. Founder Division does not exist anymore." The sentence slipped out too fast. Too bitter. Diane Mercer looked at her sharply. Tiny clue. Tiny crack. Because Founder Division absolutely still existed. Quietly. Privately. Above normal operations. Brittany realized her mistake instantly and bulldozed forward louder to cover it. "Look around," she shouted toward the crowd. "Flights grounded. Systems compromised. Employees distracted. Because one woman walked in here pretending to belong where she does not belong. The crowd watched Tatum carefully now. Waiting for her to explode. To panic. To confess weakness. Instead, she slowly reached into her coat pocket and removed the torn fragment of boarding pass again. Small. Wrinkled. Fragile. The faded blue signature still visible beneath the tear. "My father signed this ticket template by hand," she said softly. Before Beacon replaced paper routes with digital systems. One older passenger near the back inhaled sharply. Harold Lockwood signed the founder route templates himself, he whispered before he could stop himself. Brittany spun toward him instantly. "Sir, unless you are legal counsel, stay out of this." The man immediately looked down and fell silent. Tiny hope crushed again. Have you ever watched truth enter a room only to see fear shove it back out? Brittany stepped closer to Tatum now. Closer than before. "You know what I think," she said quietly enough to sound cruel instead of loud. "I think you built this entire fantasy because rich people ignored you your whole life." The insult landed hard. Several passengers looked away uncomfortably. Tatum's hand trembled slightly for the first time all day. Just once. Then stillness returned. "No," she answered softly. "I built my life making sure people were not ignored." Brittany rolled her eyes dramatically. There it is again. The speeches. Then she did something colder. She turned toward the security officers and pointed directly at Tatum's coat. "Remove the bag. Remove the ledger. Remove all founder materials until authenticity is verified." One officer reluctantly reached for the black leather binder. Tatum's fingers tightened around it instinctively. Not aggressive. Protective. Like someone trying not to lose the last voice left from home. "Please," she said quietly. "That ledger matters." Brittany smiled thinly. "Not anymore." The officer slowly pulled the binder from Tatum's hands while dozens of strangers watched her lose the last piece of dignity she had protected all morning. Nobody stopped it. Nobody stepped in. Elena looked devastated behind the counter. Captain Hale's jaw tightened visibly. But the ledger still disappeared into security custody anyway. False victory settled across Brittany's face completely now. She thought she had buried the story. Buried the proof. Buried the woman standing in front of her. "Escort her downstairs," she ordered again. "And keep her away from executive communications." Two officers stepped beside Tatum. One gestured toward the hallway leading away from the gate. Passengers parted silently as she began walking. Heads turned. Phones followed. Some people stared with pity. Others with suspicion. Most with relief that it was happening to someone else. Then, halfway toward the corridor, something slipped from inside the torn lining of Marion Lockwood's old coat. Small. Metallic. It struck the marble floor with a sharp click that echoed through the silent terminal. Everyone looked down at once. A gold access key. Heavy. Old-fashioned. Engraved with one line across the surface. Founder Vault, Chairwoman Access Only. And from somewhere behind the crowd, a deep voice suddenly thundered across the terminal. "Stop right there." The gold access key spun once across the marble floor before settling beside Brittany Vale's heel. Founder Vault, Chairwoman Access Only. Nobody breathed. The deep voice echoed again from the far end of the terminal. Nobody touches that key. Heads turned instantly. A line of black-suited executive security officers stepped out from the private corridor beside the executive elevator. Behind them walked an elderly black man in a charcoal suit carrying a silver-topped cane. His posture was slow but commanding. The moment Captain Marcus Hale saw him, he straightened automatically. "Mr. Whitaker," he whispered. Several older Beacon employees nearby reacted the same way. Arthur Whitaker. Former operations chief. 40 years with Beacon Air. One of the last surviving executives from the founder era. Brittany's confidence cracked visibly. "Sir," she began quickly, "this woman has disrupted airline operations and, I heard you the first 6 times, Whitaker said coldly without looking at her. The room went still again. Tatum Lockwood remained beside the security officers while the old executive's eyes slowly moved from the coat, to the torn ticket fragment, to the gold access key on the floor. Something painful crossed his face. Recognition. Real recognition. One security officer bent carefully and picked up the key using both hands like it mattered. Because suddenly it did. Brittany forced a nervous laugh. People fake executive memorabilia all the time. Nobody laughed with her this time. Even the phone's recording had lowered slightly. Whitaker extended his hand silently. The officer placed the key into his palm. The old man turned it over once beneath the terminal lights. Tiny engraved numbers glimmered near the edge. CH-01. Chairwoman Access Series 1. His fingers trembled slightly. "I approved this engraving myself," he said quietly. Silence crashed across Gate 14. One passenger actually stepped backward. Another lowered her phone completely. Brittany's mouth opened, then closed again. That proves the key is real," she stammered quickly. "Not her." Tatum finally spoke. Calm. Soft. "No. It proves somebody remembered what Beacon used to be." The words hit harder than shouting. Diane Mercer looked visibly shaken now. Elena stood frozen behind the desk, staring at Tatum with growing disbelief. Have you ever watched a room realize they may have humiliated the wrong person? Brittany refused to let the silence settle. "Sir, with respect, she still accessed restricted systems illegally." Whitaker's eyes moved toward her slowly. "Then explain why founder protocols recognized her voice authorization." Brittany swallowed hard. System corruption. Founder systems are isolated from public networks. Then somebody helped her. Who? Brittany had no answer ready this time. Tiny cracks spread through the room. Tiny cracks in authority. In confidence. In the story she built. Then Elena's disconnected monitor suddenly flickered back on by itself. A recovered camera feed loaded automatically across the screen. Grainy black and white footage from the archive room 3 months earlier. Brittany inside the founder vault. Removing a leather ledger from storage. The crowd leaned forward instinctively. "Turn that off," Brittany snapped immediately. Nobody moved. "I said turn it off." Her voice finally sounded afraid. Captain Hale stepped closer to the screen. Zoom. The image sharpened slowly. Brittany's employee badge became visible. Beneath her name sat temporary executive override clearance. Unauthorized. Diane stared in disbelief. "You forged executive access." Brittany pointed wildly toward Tatum. "She manipulated this. She planned all of this." "No," Whitaker said quietly. "She waited." That sentence changed the air completely. Because waiting implied something bigger. Older. Intentional. The crowd felt it now. So did Brittany. Tatum looked toward the frozen departure boards overhead. Rows of delayed flights glowed red across the terminal. Her voice stayed steady. "My grandfather built Beacon because black families were treated like burdens when they traveled." The room listened now. Fully listened. "My mother fought so people would not be humiliated for how they looked." Brittany interrupted instantly, desperate. Enough with the speeches. But her voice no longer controlled the room. It bounced weakly against silence. "If the truth fully opens here, who do you think will panic first?" Brittany stepped suddenly toward the monitor. "Delete the footage." One executive security officer blocked her path immediately. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "step back." That word hit her harder than any accusation. "Ma'am. Not Ms. Vale. Not supervisor. Just another person losing control." Whitaker slowly approached Tatum now. Close enough to see the stitching inside Marion Lockwood's coat clearly beneath the overhead lights. His eyes softened painfully. "I remember the day she wore this through Dallas after the protests," he whispered. Several older employees nearby exchanged stunned looks. Real memory. Real history. Brittany backed away one step. Then another. But desperation makes people reckless. "Fine," she snapped. "If she is so important, let the board identify her publicly." Diane's tablet suddenly chimed again. Incoming executive authentication request. Live visual confirmation required. Whitaker looked toward the giant departure monitor hanging above gate 14. Then toward the entire crowd watching. "Put it on the main screen," he ordered quietly. Brittany's face went white. The monitor flickered once. Then twice. And slowly, across the massive terminal display, a founder authentication profile began loading line by line. The massive departure monitor flickered above gate 14 while the entire terminal stared upward in silence. One line loaded first. Legacy authorization confirmed. Then another. Founder family access verified. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Brittany Vale stood frozen beneath the glow of the screen, her face drained white under the terminal lights. "This is fake," she whispered immediately. Too quickly. Too desperately. Arthur Whitaker did not even look at her. "Continue authentication," he ordered. The system chimed once. Then a black and white photograph slowly filled the giant display. A younger Marion Lockwood standing beside a Beacon aircraft in the exact same wool coat Tatum wore now. The same silver wing pin. The same calm eyes. Gasps spread through the lounge. Phones lowered completely this time. Captain Hale stared upward in disbelief. Elena covered her mouth with trembling fingers. "Oh my God," somebody whispered near the back. Brittany shook her head hard. Old photos prove nothing. The monitor changed again. Another file opened automatically beneath the image. Founder Family Executive Registry. Access level, Chairwoman. The crowd leaned forward instinctively. One final line began typing itself across the screen letter by letter. Tatum Lockwood, current Chairwoman, Beacon Airways. Silence swallowed the terminal whole. Real silence. The kind that changes people. One security officer immediately stepped backward away from Tatum. Another lowered his hand from his radio entirely. The businessman who laughed earlier looked down at the floor. The woman clutching her designer bag slowly loosened her grip. Brittany stared at the screen like it had betrayed her personally. "No," she whispered. "No, that is not possible." Arthur Whitaker finally turned toward the crowd fully. His voice carried across the marble lounge with painful clarity. "Tatum Lockwood has served as acting chairwoman of Beacon Air for the last 10 years. Another stunned silence hit harder than the first. 10 years. The woman they mocked. The woman they tried to remove. The woman Brittany forced to beg at the gate. She had controlled the entire airline the whole time. Brittany stepped backward once. She should have identified herself. Tatum looked at her quietly. "You should not need a title before offering someone dignity." The sentence landed like a hammer. Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. Elena started crying silently behind the desk. Captain Hale exhaled hard and straightened instinctively toward Tatum. Not fear. Respect. Real respect. Brittany still fought desperately to hold on to something. She manipulated founder systems. "No," Diane Mercer answered sharply now. The systems recognized her automatically. Brittany pointed wildly toward the monitor. Then why travel like this? Why hide? Tatum's fingers brushed the worn sleeve of Marion Lockwood's coat gently. Because my mother once walked through this airport and was treated exactly the same way. The crowd went dead still again. I wanted to know if Beacon remembered who we built this airline for. Arthur Whitaker slowly lifted the gold access key for everyone to see. Founder vault clearance only responds to living chair authority. He looked directly at Brittany now. You knew that. Brittany's mouth opened slightly. No words came out. Diane stepped forward coldly. 3 months ago you accessed restricted founder archives without authorization. Captain Hale added quietly, and today you attempted to destroy evidence. Every sentence stripped another layer of control away from Brittany in public. The power reversal happened slowly enough for everyone to feel it. The same people who ignored Tatum minutes ago now stepped aside automatically to clear space around her. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered fraud anymore. They were looking at her differently now. Carefully. Like people suddenly realizing they had insulted history itself. Have you ever watched respect arrive too late to erase what people already revealed about themselves? Brittany tried one final time. I was protecting the airline. No, Tatum said softly. You were protecting the version of the airline that forgot compassion. Silence. Heavy. Human. Then Elena reached slowly beneath the desk and placed the torn boarding pass fragments carefully back into Tatum's hands. Small gesture. Huge meaning. Tatum accepted them gently. Not triumphantly. Just carefully. Like something sacred had finally been returned. Arthur Whitaker looked toward the executive security officers. Recover every founder archive removed from the vault. Yes, sir. And secure all footage from this terminal immediately. Brittany's breathing became uneven now. Panic fully visible. Because she understood what came next. The cameras. The archive footage. The forged override access. The destroyed ticket. The humiliation. It was all recorded. Diane's tablet chimed one final time. She looked down slowly. Then toward Tatum. The full board is requesting an emergency session, she said carefully. Tonight. Tatum nodded once. Calm. Controlled. But then Diane added something else quietly enough to make the room tense again. There is one more issue. Arthur Whitaker frowned. What issue? Diane turned the tablet around slowly. A recovered internal report glowed on the screen. Filed 6 months earlier. Complaint submitted by Marion Lockwood Passenger Dignity Program. Investigation status, buried by executive override. Responsible approving employee. Brittany Vale. The entire room turned toward Brittany at once. And for the first time all day, nobody stood beside her. Nobody stood beside Brittany Vale anymore. The silence around her felt different now. Not shocked. Not confused. Empty. The giant departure monitor still glowed overhead with Tatum Lockwood's executive registry profile while passengers stared at Brittany like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. Brittany looked around desperately for support. This was a misunderstanding, she said quickly. I was following protocol. No one answered. Arthur Whitaker stepped forward slowly with the gold founder key still resting in his hand. Protocol. His voice stayed calm. Dangerous calm. You destroyed a founder boarding credential. Brittany swallowed hard. I thought it was fraudulent. Diane Mercer lifted the recovered archive footage onto the terminal screens again. Brittany inside the founder vault. Removing records. Accessing restricted archives. You buried formal dignity complaints, Diane said coldly. You locked archive systems. You tampered with executive access. Brittany shook her head rapidly now. No. No, I was protecting Beacon's image. Tatum finally looked directly at her again. Not angry. Just tired. An airline loses its image the moment it stops seeing people. The sentence landed harder than any punishment could have. Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. One younger attendant quietly removed her own Beacon scarf and folded it in her hands nervously. Because now everyone understood what the humiliation had really exposed. Not just one cruel employee. A culture that forgot dignity. Captain Hale stepped beside Tatum and held out the torn boarding pass fragments Elena had returned earlier. Carefully. Respectfully. Ma'am, he said softly. Tatum accepted the pieces gently. Her fingers brushed across her father's faded signature again. Harold Lockwood. The same signature Brittany tore apart in front of strangers. Around them, passengers who recorded the humiliation earlier slowly lowered their phones one by one. A businessman cleared his throat awkwardly. The woman with the designer bag looked away in shame. Even the little boy near the window stared at Tatum now with quiet admiration instead of confusion. Arthur Whitaker turned toward executive security. Brittany Vale's gate authority is suspended effective immediately. One officer stepped forward. Ma'am, your badge. Brittany froze. You cannot do this publicly. You made it public, Diane answered sharply. Brittany's hands trembled as she slowly unclipped her Beacon badge from her uniform. The sound of the metal clip snapping free echoed louder than it should have. One security officer accepted it without expression. Status reversal. Complete. Brittany looked toward Tatum one last time. You could have stopped this earlier. Tatum held her gaze calmly. You could have treated me like a human being earlier. Silence again. Real silence. Brittany's eyes finally dropped. She had no answer left. Diane Mercer turned toward the crowd and raised her voice clearly enough for the entire terminal to hear. Beacon Air formally acknowledges misconduct against Chairwoman Tatum Lockwood and violations of the Marion Lockwood Passenger Dignity Program. Several employees visibly stiffened at hearing the program name spoken publicly. Diane continued. An immediate ethics review will begin across all Beacon terminals effective tonight. Nearby staff exchanged uneasy looks. The system itself was changing now. Not just one employee falling. Arthur Whitaker slowly handed the founder key back to Tatum. This belongs with you. Tatum accepted it quietly. Not like a victory trophy. More like something painful finally returning home. Elena suddenly stepped out from behind the gate counter holding the silver wing pin carefully in both hands. I cleaned it, she whispered nervously. Tatum looked at the young attendant for a moment before taking it gently. Thank you. Elena's eyes filled with tears immediately. I should have stopped her sooner. Tatum shook her head softly. You spoke when it mattered. Tiny dignity restored. Tiny healing beginning. Then Captain Hale turned toward the frozen departure boards overhead. Operations is waiting for your order, Chairwoman. Every eye in the terminal moved back toward Tatum again. The same woman they mocked less than an hour ago now held the future of the entire airline in her hands. Tatum looked up at the rows of grounded flights glowing red across the screens. Then toward the passengers stranded around the terminal. Families. Workers. Elderly travelers. Children asleep on luggage. Innocent people caught in the fallout. Resume flights, she said quietly. Several executives looked surprised. Brittany looked stunned most of all. Tatum slipped the silver wing pin back into her mother's coat pocket. The passengers should not suffer for leadership failures. Arthur Whitaker closed his eyes briefly like the words hurt him and healed him at the same time. Across the terminal, departure boards slowly began changing from red to green. Flights resumed one by one. The crowd watched Tatum differently now. Not as a disruption. Not as a fraud. As someone who carried power without cruelty. But even as dignity returned to the room, Tatum's fingers lingered quietly on the worn edge of Marion Lockwood's coat. Because justice did not erase the wound underneath it. And near the private executive corridor, Diane Mercer stepped closer with a softer expression than before. "Chairwoman," she said carefully, "there is someone waiting upstairs who has been asking for you since the moment the flight stopped." The private executive corridor upstairs was quiet in a way the terminal below no longer was. No boarding calls. No rolling luggage. Just soft lighting, old photographs, and the distant hum of aircraft engines restarting one by one across JFK. Tatum Lockwood walked slowly beside Diane Mercer with Marion Lockwood's wool coat still wrapped around her shoulders. In one hand she carried the restored founder ledger. In the other, the silver wing pin Elena had cleaned for her. The same pin her mother once repaired at a kitchen table decades ago. At the end of the corridor, the doors to the old founder conference room stood open for the first time in years. Arthur Whitaker waited beside them quietly. "Someone asked to see you before the board meeting," he said softly. Tatum stepped inside. And stopped. Eleanor Vale sat alone near the window overlooking the runway. Brittany's grandmother. Small hands folded carefully over a cane. White hair pinned neatly back. The moment she saw Marion's coat, tears filled her eyes instantly. "I knew that coat," she whispered. Tatum said nothing at first. Eleanor looked down shakily. "Your grandfather paid for my husband's medical flight after the war when no airline would take us." Silence settled gently between them. Not painful this time. Human. "Isaiah Lockwood told me dignity mattered more than pride," Eleanor said quietly. "I should have taught Brittany better." Tatum sat across from her slowly. "Pain travels through families when nobody heals it." Eleanor nodded once, eyes wet. "Will she lose everything?" Tatum looked through the glass wall toward the terminal below where passengers were boarding again under green departure screens. "She already lost the most important thing before today," she answered softly. "Compassion." Downstairs, Brittany Vale quietly removed the rest of her uniform pieces inside the employee office while other attendants avoided looking directly at her. No cheering. No cruelty. Just consequence. Elena stepped into the room holding a folded coat bag carefully against her chest. "These belong in Founder archives," she said quietly. Inside sat recovered Founder materials Brittany had hidden months earlier. The silver Route 7 photograph. Marion's handwritten training notes. Original dignity policy drafts signed by Harold Lockwood himself. Brittany lowered her eyes. For the first time all day, she looked small instead of powerful. "I never thought it mattered," she admitted weakly. Elena answered gently, "That was the problem." Upstairs, the Beacon board meeting ended faster than anyone expected. Not because Tatum demanded revenge. Because she demanded reform. 2 hours later, new directives moved across every Beacon employee screen nationwide. Mandatory dignity training restored. Founder history returned to onboarding. Passenger bias reporting protected from executive override. The Marion Lockwood Passenger Dignity Program officially reinstated across all Beacon routes. Employees stopped at terminals around the country reading the announcement quietly. Some ashamed. Some thoughtful. Some emotional. At Gate 14, Captain Hale personally greeted delayed passengers boarding the resumed Dallas flight. No VIP rope. No separate line. An elderly black woman approached slowly with a worn paper ticket trembling slightly in her hand. For one brief second, the entire gate remembered what happened earlier that day. Then Elena smiled warmly and stepped forward first. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." No hesitation. No judgment. Just dignity. The little boy from earlier looked up at his mother and whispered proudly, "That is the right way." His mother squeezed his hand silently. Near the boarding scanner, Arthur Whitaker carefully mounted Marion Lockwood's old slogan plaque back onto the gate wall where luxury advertisements had hidden it for years. Every passenger has a name. Travelers paused to read it now. Really read it. Before leaving the terminal, Tatum stopped one final time beside the giant windows overlooking the runway. Dawn light had begun breaking softly across the tarmac. Planes moved again. Quietly. Steadily. Alive. Diane Mercer approached holding a new Beacon executive badge. Chairwoman Tatum Lockwood. Tatum looked at it for a moment before slipping it into her pocket beside the torn ticket fragment instead of wearing it. Diane smiled faintly. You still prefer paper things. Tatum touched the edge of Marion's coat sleeve gently. Paper remembers people longer. Then she turned toward the gate where passengers continued boarding beneath softer voices and calmer eyes. The same airport that humiliated her hours earlier now stood quiet with respect as she walked past. Not because people feared her title. Because they finally understood the cost of forgetting someone's humanity. And as the first morning flight lifted into the brightening sky, a young attendant bent down to help an exhausted traveler pick up a fallen paper ticket before saying softly, "Take your time, ma'am. You belong here."